Welcome, everybody, to week 6 of Liberation Music Therapy. And this is a presentation on embodied mindfulness. So, as we have prior, we've been going through the Praxis Wheel, which is trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive practice, culture and nuance, and then empathetic concern and compassionate action. This week, we're getting into embodied mindfulness, and we're going to be speaking about it in 2 sections. And the first is mindfulness, and the second is actually complementary and alternative practices. So, part 1, mind. So, there are 3 things to really get into our conceptual brain. And that is that mindfulness is a type of awareness. So before we get into what specifically mindfulness is, we're going to talk about just at least in regards to this sort of embodied, lived experience. So the first type is absent-mindedness or forgetful awareness. The second type of awareness is choiceful awareness. And the third type of awareness is choiceless awareness. So that is absent-mindedness, concentration, and mindfulness. Absent-mindedness, just to give a clear, concrete example, but if you have ever gotten into, let's say you leave your place of living and you get into some kind of vehicle or you walk and you have left the place that you live and you get to the location in which you are moving to. And somewhere in between getting from point A to point B, you definitely got there, but you don't actually remember the trip. You weren't actually paying attention to what you were doing, how you were driving, how you were walking. And it doesn't mean that we are shut off. It doesn't mean that our brain just completely forgets everything, but there's an absent-mindedness to it. And this absent-mindedness can apply to many, many ways in which we move through the world. But the example I like to use for just a concrete example of absent-mindedness is those examples of when you travel from point A to point B and you don't remember the specifics of the journey, and yet still somehow you made all the right turns. You didn't crash into anybody. You got there in the right amount of time. All of those factors. Concentration, this is choiceful awareness. This is more of things like a breathing oriented meditation or sensation oriented to the actual putting your energy onto an object. So maybe an image or a smell or a sensation. But concentration is actually, when we're talking about it in terms of awareness, we're talking about focusing onto something. And then there is mindfulness, and this is the choiceless awareness. This is the embodied ability to identify we are choiceless in our awarenesses. A really good way to practice just how to identify a choiceless awareness that is happening right now. A quick experiment. The first thing I would like you to do is close your eyes. And so when you close your eyes, take into account what you see directly in front of you. Now quickly open your eyes. Now, what do you see directly in front of you? Close your eyes. What is directly in front of you? Eyes. What is directly in front of you? Now, we're going to get into a choiceless awareness. Close your ears. You cannot close your ears. There are sounds happening actively all the time. we are hearing things constantly, whether we have a choice to hear it or not. So this is what choiceless awareness can be. It's about the sensations. It's about the observing the sensations that are happening within the body, whether it be through sight or sound or touch or smell or taste or mind. Another concept that I want to put out before we get into mindfulness, and this goes back to when we talked about trauma a few sessions ago, is the concept of soma. So we sometimes hear phrases like mind, body, spirit, or get your mental and your social in order, or get your spiritual self in order, as well as your physical health in order. And all of that is perfectly fine and dandy to live your life by, to think of things. But for our purposes, when we are referring to anything within the lived experience, we're talking about your soma, which is the interconnected relationship between your thinking, your emotions, your actions, your relationships, and your worldview, and how they're embodied into a continuous experience. So this is mind, body, spirit, relationships, all at the same time. Our worldview is constantly changing and shifting through bits and pieces. Consider, what was your worldview 15 years ago from today? And was it the same worldview in which you hold currently? Most people have had shifts within that period of time. So the question then to ask is, well, when did that worldview change? We don't know. It happens bit by bit. So we're really considering the interconnected relationship between our mental health, our emotional health, our behavioral health, our relational health, and just even the way we perceive the world, the way that we view the world. All right, cool. So let's get into it. So what is mindfulness? It's extremely important to remember that mindfulness is not a contemporary fad practice. It actually comes from the Buddhist practice of sati, which means moment to moment awareness, as well as remembering to be. It is a core element of the Noble Eightfold Path. It's a piece known as right mindfulness or samasati, and it is taught as a direct path to the freedom from suffering or the liberation of oneself through finding nibbana. This was articulated by Siddhartha Gautama, who we know colloquially as the Buddha, or at least one of the Buddhas. And he articulated this in the late 6th or early 5th century BCE. There are 4 general concepts that come out of the original moment-to-moment awareness teachings of Sati, the original remembering to be aware teachings of Sati, and that is Anapatana. Let me restart all of that. Anapasati Patana, Vipassana, and Samatha. So these are 4 different practices, and I am a regular practitioner of Anapanasati and Vipassana. That's why I pronounce those ones much more quickly than Satipatthana. But anyways, Anapanasati is mindfulness of breathing. So that is actually the awareness of breath. Satipatthana is the establishing of mindfulness of body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of mind, and mindfulness of mental patterns. So it's the actual practice of mindfulness. Vipassana is the practice itself on developing insight into one sense of impermanence, one sense of unsatisfactoriness, and one sense of non-self. These are all complex concepts that can be discussed either after the workshop or at another time. But this is where the roots of mindfulness come from. And then finally, it is the teaching of samatha, which is the concept of the calming and stabilizing mind that helps support insight. So by developing a calm mental state, one is able to actually engage in finding insight into impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self through the practice of establishing mindfulness of body, feelings, mind, and mental patterns. And this is all by grounding oneself through mindfulness of breathing. So that's all from the Buddhist tradition, but I'm going to get a little more contemporary, a little more translatable to how we can apply mindfulness, or what mindfulness means for our purposes right now. So mindfulness is a skill you build by practicing awareness of your thoughts, feelings, and body sensations in the present moment without judgment. So there is mindful awareness that can be directed towards inner experiences, which is our thoughts, our emotions, our bodily sensations, or mindful awareness that can be directed towards our outer experiences, which is our speaking, our listening, our intentional movement, etc. So mindfulness, it can be understood. Another way to think about it is it can be understood in three different ways. It can be understood as a trait, a tendency to be aware and present. It can be understood as a state, which is a temporary experience of being fully present. Or it can be understood as a practice, such as meditation used to cultivate mindfulness. So again, we can understand mindfulness in three different ways. That is as a trait, as a state, or as a practice. And it is about our awareness being directed towards inner experiences and outer experiences. Three meditation practices. Now, this comes into how to actually cultivate a mindfulness meditation practice. So the first type of meditation that I often recommend, and many other meditation teachers recommend, is to develop a concentrative meditation technique or learn a concentrative meditation skill. So this is, again, it's focusing attention on a single object, such as the breath, such as a sound or a visual point. Now, I practice Anapana meditation, which is breathing. And the Anapana meditation that I practice is bringing attention to the area right above the upper lip and below the nostril. And so whenever I begin a meditation session, when I'm actually sitting down to meditate, I always or often begin with breathing exercise. And this is simply to be used as an anchor. So when your mind starts to wander, you can always return to this concentrative meditation. And one thing I have told many meditation students, as well as many fellow meditation practitioners or practicers, when we speak about the mind wandering, there's often this myth from novice meditators in which they feel they are not meditating correctly because their mind is starting to wander. That is an impossible task. Just like earlier, how the exercise was cover your ears, you can't stop your mind from wandering. It is not possible to happen. Our brain, it doesn't work that way. So the point of a concentrative meditation is that when you become aware that your mind is wandering, you bring your concentration back to the object. Again, I practice, I'm biased in this, of course, but I practice Anapana meditation just because I appreciate the breath being with me at all points in life. If you are not breathing, you are quite literally not living. You can go days without water. You can go weeks without food. You can only go a few moments without breath. That is why I am drawn to using breath as the object for when I'm grounding myself in a meditative practice. But yeah, a way to think of concentration or concentrative meditations is it is like doing push-ups for the mind. It is not that if you have schizophrenia or you struggle with bipolar disorder, it is not that this meditation practice is going to heal that piece of your mental health issues. The same way as going to the gym or doing exercises is not going to solve or cure your bone marrow cancer that you may be struggling with. So concentrative meditation, it's like fitness. It's about strengthening your brain, strengthening your mind. That's how I think of it. The second meditation practice is mindfulness meditation. And this is the actual present moment awareness of bodily sensations, of surroundings, of our thoughts and our emotions without reacting to or judging them. I will tell you all the last meditation retreat I went on, and I've been practicing meditation pretty regularly since 2015. But the last meditation retreat I recently went on, I caught myself getting stuck in moments of anger where I would be stuck thinking of a disagreement that I had with somebody in my family from months ago, and I would get stuck on this moment, and I would feel myself getting angry inside from these experiences. And I would tell myself, like, bro, you need to get over this anger. Guess what? That is not a mindfulness practice. Mindfulness is the moment to moment awareness, the present moment awareness. So that is an awareness of thought and emotion and body sensation, as well as surrounding. I'm literally not in front of this family member. Why am I spending this time recreating an argument that is not going to have any kind of resolution here in this moment? The reason I'm telling this story is I would tell myself, you need to get over the anger. But the mindful approach is to actually acknowledge that the anger is there and let the anger arise and pass away. One of the great strengths of developing a mindful awareness or a choiceless awareness, becoming aware of our surroundings, both internally and externally. One of the great skills of developing this is you can start to become mindful when you are catching yourself in the midst of something. The example I love to give to meditation students is, have you ever been in an argument with a person, and after the argument, you sit and think about the things you wish you should have said, but you didn't, and you really want to go back and say those things? So then the second part of the question is, how often, and be real, have you gotten the chance to say those things to that person and it resolved the situation? I do not know your personal experience, but I do know mine. Yeah. So the point of this is to just examine how being concentrative when we meditate versus a mindfulness meditation, they're different practices. And the beauty of a mindfulness practice is you can start to identify various pieces of how all of it becomes interconnected. For instance, I have caught It's taken a long time to get here, to like just to be clear, but I've caught that when I have trauma, when I have a trauma response, this area of my chest lights up. And when I was drinking, I'm an alcoholic. I've been sober since 2020. But when I drank, this area used to feel really warm when I would drink. Years later, doing trauma therapy, it's like, okay, this area, every time I have a traumatic panic moment, this area lights up. Part of that is by being mindful. I now pay attention to, it's like if I catch an area of my body getting jolted, or if I feel stressed, I start to pay attention to that area of the body and start to actually, instead of trying to calm myself down through thoughts, I start to calm down the area of my body that is lighting up or feeling uncomfortable. And these are just how these practices can start to intertwine within our lives. The third meditation practice that is really aligned with both concentrative and mindfulness is what we call loving kindness. And this is the practice of deliberately generating feelings of goodwill, compassion, and concern for oneself and others through various repeated mantras, phrases, imageries, intentions. We might call this metta meditation. So concentrative would be Anapana meditation, mindfulness would be Vipassana meditation, and loving kindness would be metta meditation. Now, this one is a little bit more abstract in regards to the discussing of it. It is a much more embodied experience, but there's a couple of ways to practice loving kindness meditation. One of the easiest translatable ways, at least in regards to being kind to participants who are in your group or who are in your session, is to simply give people a statement of goodwill. So, may you be happy, may you be peaceful, may you be free from suffering, may all beings be happy. That's the one that I use. But this is how you focus, is you first direct that energy towards yourself. May you be happy, may you be peaceful, may you be free from suffering, may all beings be happy. The second time through, you direct it towards neutral people. So people in your life, or sorry. First it's directed at yourself, then it is directed towards positive people in your life. So this is people that you love. Like for me, it's not even a question. My daughter is one of the first people that pops into my mind when I think of somebody I love. It's just somebody you don't even question that you have a feeling for. You're going to care for them no matter what, even if you're not in their life, but it's just who's in your mind. That's the point of the meditation. Same exercise. May you be happy, may you be peaceful, may you be free from suffering, may all beings be happy. The next group is neutral beings, and a way to kind of illustrate this is somebody that you might know in passing, like somebody at a store. It can just be simply somebody that you had in passing, but it is someone who comes to mind who is not really in your relationship sphere, and you don't really have a negative feeling of them either. They're just a person who is in your passing life. But the exercise is to consider a person like that, and again, the mantra, may you be happy, may you be peaceful, may you be free from suffering, may all beings be happy. The next group is beings in which you despise. And this is people, somebody who, if I say, who do you despise? Somebody who comes up in your mind. And it can be personable, it can be abstract, it can be a political figure, it can be a celebrity, it can be, your participants don't have to tell you anything. But I will tell you that in the courses that I've taught of meditation, I've had people think of particular political figures who are active in our political sphere right now as the person who came up in their mind. I have had people where they literally described it as somebody in my life who did something criminal to me. Didn't elaborate what that meant. I'm not going to ask, but Something criminal had happened to this person, and this is how they described it. Same concept. May you be happy, may you be peaceful, may you be free from suffering, may all beings be happy. Now, this is a beautiful exercise in forgiveness because it is not about excluding the bad behavior of what somebody has done to you. I will tell you all that there are some very, very toxic people that have come up in my world, who have come up when I've done this exercise in a a real way. And there are some people that it is very hard to quote unquote forgive them for what action they have done and are not being held accountable for, or whatever reason. It is not about that. It is more about the releasing their hold of you, of what they have over your mind. It is that I heard it described very well from a participant, which was, you don't have to be okay with a person to just wish them well so that you don't have to deal with them anymore. And it was like, whoa, okay, yeah, okay. Now, this is easier said than done for every circumstance. And then finally, it is, you focus your attention on the entire living ecosphere, which is large. And may you be happy, may you be free, or may you be peaceful, may you be free from suffering. May all beings be happy. And that is a really good way to practice loving kindness in regards to a mantra. I'll tell you all that I had a very profound experience this last meditation retreat regarding loving kindness, where for the first time in my life, I actually felt the connectivity with everything else. And it is, I can tell you about it, we can talk about it, but there's no way to actually put you in that circumstance on when I felt that feeling, because I've been doing this practice for years and I haven't felt it this deeply on an embodied experience. So I don't know how to teach that, other than you just got to keep doing it and find a practice that works for you. And it's this is about the way that I identify mindfulness practice is where a material or a scientific analysis is analyzing the construction of the material world. Mindfulness or concentrative practices, loving kindness practices, is doing the same type of dissecting work that science does to the material world, or philosophy does to understanding, but it does that dissecting on the lived experience. So one thing I try to emphasize to everybody, but especially to people who have no formal training in mental health professions, is that you are an expert in your lived experience. That does not mean you are an expert of anybody else's lived experience. And that is why formal training is important when we're working with mental health. But again, that's not really what this course is for. This is just to put into y'all's mind on starting to establish a mindfulness practice and just starting to be aware of what mindfulness actually is. A lot of people, when they take a meditation course, they come in with the concept of they want their brain to stop working, or they want to stop thinking, and that will never happen. It won't happen. The Dalai Lama hasn't figured that out. So unless you have figured out a deeper meditation practice than the Dalai Lama, I'm assuming one hasn't. It's like, have you figured out how to play basketball better than LeBron James? You got to kind of show it. So that's how I feel about mindfulness meditation practice. Sometimes people who have not gone into any kind of serious or at least formal practice, they have a misconception on what they're even looking for. It's like, I'm not meditating right. My mind is wandering. You are meditating right. You're noticing your mind is wandering. So that's what we're getting into. One big piece of the technical understanding of mindfulness is that when we are absent-minded, that is when we're distracted. So again, mindfulness is the choiceless awareness. Concentrative meditation is the choiceful awareness. Absent-minded is the forgetful awareness, the like, oh, like I'm not lost in my thoughts, lost in my whatever. So this is really addressing that absent-mindedness when we are in those spaces of distractedness. But there's three areas of distraction, and there's craving, aversion, and ignorance. And this really helps just work across many, many, many fields. There are going to be things you like and people you like. There are going to be things you don't like and people you don't like. There are going to be things you don't know about or are oblivious about and just didn't even know it was something you had to consider. This applies to just not only our internal sensation awareness, but it also just in our mental knowledge that it's good to be aware that I am drawn to this because I like this thing, or I am feeling an aversion because I don't like this thing, or I don't know anything about this topic or this subject. Let me put it this way. For craving, that is the compulsive pull towards pleasure, comfort, or relief. And the way that I think of craving, to put it into a word phrasing, or is anytime you have that internal, whether quite literally or more of just a feeling, but anytime you have that internalized, I'll be happy once I get fill in the blank. I'll be happy once I get in that relationship. I'll be happy once I eat that cheeseburger. I'll be happy once I watch that movie. I'll be happy once I get those tickets. I'll be happy once I see the love of my life again. I'll be happy once I see my grandmother on her deathbed again. Notice how I put different extremes of craving. The point is that it doesn't matter what the craving is. It is just about identifying that there is a craving or a pull for something pleasure-oriented. So any person you love, there is a craving for that person. And it's not right or wrong. We are not moralizing. We are identifying. It doesn't mean that you are not distracted. It means that there is an area of distraction. And by identifying that there is an area of distraction, you can be aware that there's distraction. Doesn't mean you're going to nail what it is, but just to be more mindful of things. Aversion. This is the automatic push away from pain or discomfort or a threat, expressed, it's often through like avoidance or resistance or rejection of unpleasant experiences. Of your aversion, it really fuels suffering. It creates fear, anger, avoidant behaviors, trauma-based reactivity. This can be just the exact opposite. Like, I never want to go there again. Have you ever expressed that or felt that feeling? That is an aversion. Whether or not it's legitimate or not. It's about identifying the area of distraction. Sometimes an aversion can be as simple as, I don't want to go there because it makes me uncomfortable. All the way to, I don't want to go there because those people are fucking fascist and I don't want to be around a whole bunch of fascists. All the way to, that smells bad. Or, I don't like that art. Or, I don't like that movie. Or, I don't like the music that this kid is listening to. Or, I am giving my best effort and I still don't like the music that this kid is listening to. These are real things that have happened in my own life where sometimes you just hear something and it's like, man, oh man, oh man. Gotta learn how to like this. I've gotten past that, to be super frank with all y'all. Like, I'm pretty open to lots of music at this point. But there are moments where it's like, we're listening to this for the next hour and a half. Okay. And it is what it is. So yeah, it's just about acknowledging and identifying those things. And again, aversion, it is not about being real. It is not about it being legitimate or rational or irrational or illegitimate. It's about the lived experience. Are you having a craving for something, a pull towards something, or are you having a push from something? And right in the middle, ignorance. This is the misunderstanding of reality. which is especially the misunderstanding of impermanence, that is, that everything is constantly changing, misunderstanding interdependence, and misunderstanding the nature of self. Ignorance sustains both craving and aversion because it causes us to perceive the world in distorted or fixed or absolute ways. A prime way that I heard it described from a Buddhist monk, you know what, I'm realizing this is actually a Thich Nhat Hanh story. So yeah, Thich Nhat Hanh, the famous Vietnamese monk and Buddhist scholar, he spoke about the concept of relative truth and absolute truth. How relative truth is, there was a woman he knew who was a devout Buddhist who wanted at the top of the house the altar in which they put the Buddhist, where they meditated, so that the metta would fill the house and make it just a healthy, safe place of healing and practice and all of that. And that's a relative truth. It's like, okay, this person feels this way is true. It does. It feels like it gives an energy to this place. That is relative truth. People come here, they believe that. People come here, they feel that. That is all well and good. The absolute truth is that we are a group of organisms on a rock floating in the middle of nothingness of space, and that there is no top of the house out of all of that to even put the meditation space. So it's all about where our perception is. So the absolute truth is that you only perceive this thing being on top of you at the top of this house because you're grounded to a planet, but the planet is actually nothingness floating in the middle of nothingness amongst a lot of nothingness. And what is up and what is down, other than we've agreed upon a lived experience on your perception of what up and down is, or you at least align with the concept of what your understanding of up and down is. So that's a little abstract, but it gets into real lived experiences. On a couple weeks ago, I think, the example of speaking to a Japanese immigrant about her project on nuclear energy, and my thought was, must be about climate change. And then, because that is a big topic, climate change and nuclear energy is their continuous dialogue. But then when I asked her what interested her, or why she got involved in doing a project about nuclear energy, it was because she's Japanese and she had family members that were completely devastated from the 2 nuclear bombs that have been dropped on human civilizations, which both were done to her country by this country, the United States. And so that was a piece of my ignorance. I literally, just because I did not have the insights that she has from being in her literal lived experiences, I didn't even consider where she was coming from and why she would choose a piece. And so we just have to be aware that we're ignorant. Another good lived experience example was one of my gentlemen, younger guy. I told him that this gentleman is probably 18. I think he was 18. He's either 17 or 18, but he was going to be going upstate for a while. And I said something to the tune of, once people get to their late 30s, they don't even do the gangbanger shit. They don't even do it like that. Because I go upstate, and I do go to the upstate prisons, not as regularly as the city jails. The city jails are where I see a lot more day-to-day people. The upstate prison, I go for a music program that's once a month. And all the guys there are just very, very reformed, very, like, they're rehabilitated all the way through. And so that, and by, like, this has been my experience for a while now, just meeting folks upstate. And it's like, oh yeah, like, that gangbanger shit doesn't even last. And he was like, bro, you don't fucking know that. He just looked at me and he was like, you don't know that. You have no idea what goes on upstate when you're not around, like, up there. And, like, just even getting into, actually thought processing it, where it was just, my ignorance was based on that the programming that I do upstate is involved with people who are allowed to participate in programming due to good behavior and due to all of those factors. And so there's like a whole world I don't know about. And then there's also like the fact that some of them don't want to bring their shit, about what's going on into these like positive music sessions at this particular type of group. On the more day to day, you learn about people's day to day troubles. People's like high energy disappears a little bit. You might get into an argument with a participant or those kinds of things. But it was just such an eye opener where it was like, how ignorant was it of me to just assume that I know what life is like in an upstate prison, because I do have more insights than a lot of people from the outside world would, but not the same that this kid is going to have, like just not the same. And he didn't even tell me I was wrong. He just told me I didn't know. And it was like, yeah, no, you're right, dude. You're totally right. Yeah. The last piece on mindfulness, and this is directly from a Buddhist teaching, but I think it does help in why it's important to develop a mindfulness practice. And I put a couple of the traditional translation, but then put like a more maybe accurate for our purposes translation. But these are the 5 spiritual faculties. And spiritual in this concept has little to do with a religious practice or any kind of organized religion or even organized spiritual practice. Spiritual is about the lived connection, the embodied connection to meaning, and the embodied connection to community. And so that's how we're thinking of spiritual in this context. And so the 5 spiritual faculties are faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And faith can be considered like conviction, like what are your moral principles? Where do you draw your line on things? Where do you draw your line of disbelief? Where do you draw your line on morality? Those sorts of things. And then energy can be translated into like your effort, like what are you putting into something? And it doesn't always mean cognizant effort. It can also just mean like, if you're overworked, you're putting a lot of effort into something. If you're working really hard on something, but nothing, you're not making any progress, that can be too much. That's what we're talking about when we say energy. It's about sort of the exertion of effort that your lived experience is having. The reason why it's important to look at this concept is in the Buddhist tradition, mindfulness is actually used as a way to balance the other spiritual faculties. So you balance your conviction with wisdom, or you balance your faith with wisdom. It's important to have, I'm an Army veteran. One of the things that we learned at training was trust your gear. You have to trust your gear. If you're worried that your gear is going to give out, you're actually going to cause more damage to yourself and to other people. You have to trust your gear. And that, I think, applies to any of this. You have to trust the practices. You have to trust things. Now, that being said, you cannot have blind trust. Like, just to give that material example, you can't just assume the gear is all good if you haven't checked it. So there has to be wisdom. And we've talked about the 3 types of wisdom way early on in this workshop. But it's really balancing your convictions or your faith with wisdom, with understanding and knowledge and experience. And then the other balance that mindfulness is between effort and concentration. So effort is the energy you're exerting, whereas concentration is the focus, the focusing in on something. So it is a very, very good thing to be able to concentrate your efforts or to have effort in your concentration. But it can very much be overblown where we have too much effort in something and not enough concentration. That comes to absent-mindedness. Or if we put so much focus on concentration and we don't put any effort in, that's where people don't take step 1. If you ever see nervous to take the first step, or like everything's got to be set up perfectly before we can start this thing, that's kind of where the balance is between effort and concentration. So being mindful is really a tool to help balance these other faculties of conviction and wisdom and effort and concentration. all that to say, we're going to get into the second part. This is part 2, complementary and alternative medicine. And we are going to talk about some of the more controversial pieces about complementary and alternative medicine next session. So if you have any skeptics that are watching this, if you have any issues with any of this, don't worry. We will be talking about some of the issues that maybe you may be having in next week's session. But for today, this is about the positive impacts of complementary and alternative medicine, because there are a lot of positive aspects to this world that I don't think we should forget about. So complementary and alternative medicine, as well as integrative medicine. So complementary and alternative medicine, which you might also see in the literature as CAM, these are medical practices and products that are not considered part of standard medical care. The example we'll use just for right now is something like acupuncture, not part of standard medical care. Integrative medicine. Now, this is an integrative approach that combines evidence-based medicine with evidence-supported complementary and alternative practices, which is more about focusing on the whole person, the mental, the physical, the spiritual, the soma, and patient preferences. So integrative medicine is really about addressing the soma, as well as the medical diagnoses and medical treatments through evidence-based medicines. Now, notice I put evidence-supported complementary and alternative practices. The reason is that some of these practices are evidence-based. Music therapy, art therapy, physical therapy, chiropractic, some pieces of it, some pieces not, which we'll talk about next week. But yeah, there are some evidence-based medicines in these fields, but there are also pieces like mindfulness practice, or like acupuncture, or various somatic practices, which I am a true believer in. Just, I think I've talked about somatic practices a lot, but the evidence-based practices that you might find with, let's say, clinical studies on Tylenol, they're just not going to be the same. So it's important to differentiate. Now, here's some key differentiations or key distinctions. Now, I don't use the term Western medicine, or what's the other word? It starts with the C. Content. Oh my goodness. This is where I need to write everything down in my notes because I can't think of things ad lib. Conventional medicine. Sorry. Yeah. I don't use the term Western medicine or conventional medicine, just because when we're talking about actual medicine that heals people, it comes from the sciences, which comes from every culture. And you're going to find the evidence where, no matter where you're coming from, the evidence shows itself when you're doing any kind of consistent scientific practice. When we say things like Western medicine, or the other term that I'm just not going to try to force myself to remember in this moment, conventional medicine, that is more speaking on the medical industrial complex, such as big pharma as a profit-driven model. But the reason I don't put those two terms in the same place is that when I am speaking about medicine, I am talking about the medical literature that is peer-reviewed, that has thousands of studies with thousands of meta-analysis studies, as well as constantly shifting and moving and learning. Like, for instance, one thing that really helped me understand cancer and working in radiology or in those spaces, and this does not change the impact that cancer can have on somebody's lived experience, whether it be your own body or somebody you know or love's body, or even just having somebody in your family orbit or personal orbit who is struggling with cancer. So all of that is not to take away from any of those experiences, but there is a piece of that we are now living twice as long as human beings because of hygiene, because of medicine, because of vaccines because of culture and, structure. Like, I'm living in an apartment, I can go to the bathroom, I can wash my hands. Like, all of these things are part of keeping us alive twice as long. So we are now living long enough to be able to get cancer. And this was described to me from a cancer researcher, where it's not to take away the terrors of it, but we used to not live long enough to get cancer. And that really helped me understand when I started working with people who were struggling with that illness. It doesn't change the personal trauma and struggle that an individual or that a person's experience is going through, nor does it mean we should stop doing research, which Elon Musk tried to do, stop doing research on these diseases. But it is just the reality that things are changing and things are continuously evolving, and sometimes we do go down wrong roads. So that's why I use the term evidence-based medicine. But evidence-based medicine is medical care that diagnoses and treats diseases using methods proven effective through scientific research. This includes drugs, surgery, radiation, validated behavioral treatments delivered by licensed health professionals. This is the biggest key piece. Evidence-based medicine comes from licensed health professionals. Now, are all licensed health professionals somebody who has gone through a licensure training, somebody who knows at least the science of what they're talking about? Folk medicine. This is community-based healing practices and health knowledge that's developed through cultural traditions and lived experience rather than scientific testing or formal institutions. I said acupuncture as the example we'll probably be using a lot today, but acupuncture is what we would consider a folk medicine. It comes from, I forget the specific town it comes from, but it comes from a town in China from about 2,000 years ago. And even though there is not much evidence-based practice in the medical literature, there's a lot of inconsistencies on results of acupuncture. It is still noted that after 9/11, for instance, after like a giant crisis or a giant trauma experience in which a lot of people experience an extreme trauma-inducing event at the same time, it should be noted that acupuncture was the #1 treatment sought by 9/11 survivors. And we, as in people in the medical professions, need to take that seriously. And so the way that I address this is that folk medicine is, even if it is not always able to address a consistent result across all people, there is still a tradition and documented acknowledging of results. Buddhist meditation is another one that I use as an example of, we can't necessarily study all the claims that are made and put forward by all the Buddhist masters and teachers throughout history, but we can still study what many of the Buddhist masters and thinkers were speaking about, because it's been there's been actual systems documenting and acknowledging, whether it be oral traditions or written traditions or a combination of both or other forms of documentation. But so even if it's not addressing the specific things that evidence-based medicine is addressing, it is addressing other areas, or sometimes also addressing the practices that evidence-based medicine is coming from. A reminder, all evidence-based medicine at some point in time was a folk medicine. At some point in its lineage, it was a folk medicine. So the other term is traditional medicine. And just for our terms, this is basically folk medicine that is organized, codified into medical systems within a long-standing traditional or cultural tradition. And it includes formal theories, diagnostic methods, and practitioner training. So that's kind of the way that I think about Evidence-based medicine is something that we can prove with repeatable studies and examples. Folk medicine is something we can prove through cultural tradition and lived experience and cultural knowledge. And traditional medicine is the institutionalization of folk medicine. The two big terms now are complementary medicine and alternative medicine. And this comes from those three terms that we just learned. Complementary medicine, this is non-conventional medical practices. This is music therapy, baby. Like this is what we are. We're the complementary medicine. Like this is our domain where we live. But these are non-conventional medical practices that are added to conventional medical treatment to support symptom relief, coping, and quality of life, often without replacing standard care. So acupuncture again, but acupuncture is used in chemotherapy to reduce nausea. So this would be a complementary medicine. Whereas an alternative medicine is a non-conventional medical practice that are used in place of evidence-based or conventional medical treatment. So substituting those evidence-based diagnoses. So this might be using a special diet instead of the prescribed cancer treatment that you may be going through. Now, this is where wisdom comes in, because I have seen horror stories and I have seen amazing successes on all sides of every example that I have just laid out. But just because we're talking about complementary and alternative medicine, sometimes too much medicalizing can be destructive to a person. Great example that was given to me during my internship in hospice care was a hospice doctor came in and just gave an example of there were basically, this was the scenario. There was an individual on their deathbed, and the person's spouse was some kind of doctor. I don't know if a surgeon or what, but they were an ER doctor. And then the two children of these two people, one was an ER nurse and the other was a hospice nurse. So these are three medical professionals, all with the same relationship to this person on their deathbed. And the hospice doctor gave this example because it really shows how you can have knowledge and understanding, and there still can be holes and things where we just don't know what the right answer is. But it got to the point where the ER doctor spouse and the ER nurse were trying to find the next thing to keep this person alive. And the hospice daughter, as well as the hospice doctor who was actually on scene or in the room, had to have the challenging conversation of, why are we keeping this person alive? Why are we doing this? Is this for us or is this for them? And we don't always know those answers. And the reason I appreciated this story was it did show that people in ERs, think of what that entire role is to save the person right in front of you no matter what, no matter the circumstance. And think of the situation of somebody working in hospice. You see countless people transition out of this life. And there's a certain point where no amount of healthy eating or no amount of exercise or no amount of medicine is going to save you from that. And so I find it to be a worthwhile discussion when we talk about mindfulness and meditation to also talk about complementary and alternative medicine. And I really do find a lot of these practices to be very healthy. There's a major... The reason I keep putting in these little warnings here or there is the problem with alternative medicine is that it is not a regulated industry, and we live in capitalism. And the way that I have really seen the alternative medicine industry be completely weaponized or bastardized is when a traditional medicine school of thought is stolen and capitalized off of and commercialized off of people who have no business studying or doing that practice. They haven't done the proper techniques or trainings. This happens all the time with the amount of mindfulness apps. Like, like I support mindfulness meditation, but like there are these apps out there where you're paying how much money for how many claims that are not provable. No amount of mindfulness training is going to help you survive a genocide, or no amount of mindfulness training is going to make you be okay with living in a prison. You can develop, it can be part of your journey, but it is not just going to be the mindfulness practice. There's other factors that have to be involved. If a person is starving, I don't care how much amount of mindfulness you've developed. It's just not something you're going to be able to handle. Now I will say there are mindfulness practitioners who I think could handle those circumstances, but they've been developing a mindfulness practice for years. There are practitioners who I think can handle those extreme situations, but they've already been practicing, or they had an innate ability that we don't really know how to explain. I'll use LeBron James as an example. No amount of practicing basketball is ever going to make me be able to do an ounce of what LeBron can do. So like there are people that are capable of that as well with these mindfulness practices, but they're few and far between. And most people are not either naturally inclined or have the ability to practice and develop. So that's why I think it's just important to be aware of those two major issues. But the biggest two things to be aware of when addressing alternative medicine or complementary medicine is address how the money is being made. I don't trust any kind of alternative medicine organization that makes a lot of money. I understand people got to make a living, but there is making a living and there is charging exorbitant prices for unprovable things. And then the second big issue with alternative medicine is false claims or unchecked claims. So those are just two things to keep in mind when exploring this world. But all that being said, I think that it's an extremely important space to explore and learn about. So there's 5 major categories of complementary and alternative medicine. There's the mind-body therapies. Mindfulness meditation would be one of these, but also any kind of somatic practice. So we might call meditation, biofeedback, yoga, tai chi, guided imagery, art, music, dance, hypnosis. So these are all things that might fit under mind-body therapies. Then there's the biologically based practices. You can find this with vitamins, with dietary supplements, foods or diet practices, herbs, botanicals, cannabis, psilocybin mushrooms, all of these sorts of experiences. There's also manipulative or body-based practices. This is like massage therapy, osteopathic manipulation, reflexology, chiropractic. There's energy healing. This is Reiki. I really do like good Reikis. I've had a few very good Reiki sessions in my life. I have no idea how valid it all is in the grand scheme of it, but I know that they definitely helped me a lot in the moments when I was going to them. Therapeutic touch, somatic touch would be a part of energy healing. And then there's, the actual medical system. So like traditional Chinese medicine would be a good example. And any kind of system of a traditional medical history. So these are the 5 major categories. And again, finally, I put safety reminders. Natural does not equal safe. Just remember, natural does not equal safe. There are a lot of natural things on this planet that can kill you right away. So do not trust something if it says natural. Remember, we live in a capitalist society, and that is marketing. The reason it's an issue that there's no regulatory body is that we don't know what's marketing, we don't know what's real. And it's hard to distinguish because it's hard to do that. Some marketers are real good at marketing, and you just got to be mindful of that. Some supplements can interfere with medications. Check with your doctor, check with people, check with somebody that knows what they're talking about. That's all I got to say about that. And then always consult a licensed medical provider. If you don't like a person, check out another person. I'm talking about it way easier. I know our healthcare system is horrific here in the United States, but just realize that there is an entire predatory industry out that is taking advantage of the fact that we have a horrible healthcare system. And so these are just some things to be aware of. And so that gets us to for next week. Now, if you'll notice on the Praxis Wheel, we are at educational practices and transformational practices. There is a lot to cover in that. So this whole workshop is 11 weeks if we've been going through each one. And the reason why it's 11 weeks and not 9 weeks, because instead of just going through each step of the Praxis Wheel with a intro session or an exit session, is because education is such a big topic. I felt that I needed to divide it into 3 topic areas. And it's going to be next week, which is high control dynamics and fascism, followed by the week after that, which is caste systems and class systems, and then the third, which is pedagogy of the oppressed. And but for next week, we're actually going to be talking about high control dynamics and fascism. And this is probably the most content warning of all of the sessions we are covering, because we're going to be talking about abusive relationships, domestic violence, all the way to fascism and colonialism. Just a heads up for that for next week. Again, if y'all are able to, here's the things you can donate to: Venmo, Zelle, PayPal, Cash App. This workshop is entirely free. This is workshop 0. I am testing all of this stuff. I am organizing all of this stuff for this session. But again, any support helps. It's much appreciated, but I'm not relying on this for my income, at least at this point in my life. So, I'm doing this because it's a community service project, not a money-making project, but this still does help make it easier. And then stay in touch. You can check out my projects, performances, resources at dorianwallace.com. And then I put my essays, workshops, and liberation music and music therapy reflections at my Substack. So thank you all so much. And with that, I'll see you all next week.